Good morning, Grenada and the rest of the Caribbean. Welcome to Freedom Matters, a project of Free the Slaves and the Caribbean Coalition Against Trafficking in Persons. We're your hosts, Adrian Alexander, Caribbean Regional Coordinator for Free the Slaves, and
Dr. Cherisse Francis, Leadership Committee member for the Caribbean Coalition Against Trafficking in Person.
Cherisse, how are you doing?
I am doing wonderfully today, and I'm so excited to have this conversation. Two wonderful guests who I know quite well, so this is going to be a good day.
Awesome. And tell us a bit more about our guests. Who are they?
So actually, I would prefer for them to introduce themselves because then they can give you a flavor of who they are and why they're here. So Marta, if I could ask you to introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you, Cherisse, and thank you, Adrian, for hosting us on this episode. I'm very much looking forward to the conversation today and so happy and excited to be here. My name is Marta Furlan, and I'm the Senior Program Manager for Research at Free the Slaves, and I had the pleasure and the privilege of being one of the co-authors of this report that we are going to discuss today.
And now I will turn over to Sneh. Sneh, how are you and why are you here?
Thanks, Cherisse, and thank you, Adrian. It's really a pleasure to be here. I am Sneh Aurora, Director of the Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative, or CHRI. CHRI works across the globe on human rights issues, particularly relating to access to justice and tackling human trafficking, forced labor, and other forms of exploitation. We are here today to talk about our joint report, From Climate Crisis to Human Exploitation. It has a very long title, Examining Multi-Dimensional Vulnerability in Small Island Developing States, which we'll unpack during this conversation. And in this report, we focused on Antigua and Barbuda. And in this joint project between CHRI and Free the Slaves, we've looked at how climate change is not just an environmental issue, but it's also a human rights issue.
Thank you so much, Sneh and Marta, for that overview. What actually prompted this report? Is there an overarching project? And can you give us a little background about that?
This is part of a wider project that we have. As I mentioned, Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative focuses on issues relating to forced labor, human exploitation. And we've also brought together a number of organizations working at local and national level. We've got a network called the 8.7 Network, named after the Sustainable Development Goal Target 8.7, which focuses on forced labor. And these are organizations that come together to address these kinds of issues. So we've been working on these issues for a while. We also know that the climate change is a big thing right now. It's a very critical issue that is faced by almost everyone globally. So this report really sits at the intersection of these two issues that are often discussed separately, climate change and human exploitation. And what we show through this report is that these issues are deeply connected. There is increasing global evidence that climate change acts as a risk multiplier, but the specific link to exploitation is still under-researched, especially in the Caribbean. And so we know that in Antigua and Barbuda, over 60% of people live in coastal areas. The economy is heavily dependent on tourism, and climate shocks or disasters like hurricanes have major and long-term impacts. So what we wanted to really explore and understand was what happens to people after the disaster, what happens when livelihoods disappear, because that's when vulnerability deepens, and that's where exploitation risks begin to emerge. And as I mentioned, this is part of a wider project. We're also working in the Pacific, where there are similar contexts. There's small island developing states in the Pacific region as well. We're looking to produce a report on Fiji. So we're building a global picture, and we're looking to build the comparative evidence base around these issues.
Yes, and adding to what Sneh was saying, there is increasing recognition in the anti-trafficking sector that climate change is in fact one of the factors that is producing or exacerbating some of these vulnerabilities that make people more exposed to the risk of exploitation. But then when we look at the literature, we see that there is a clear gap. there are still a very limited number of studies that are going into the depth of exploring this intersection. And even more interestingly and relevantly for the work that CHRI and Free the Slaves have been doing, we see that the few studies that are out there are mostly focused on Southeast Asia or South Asia, while the Caribbean region and small island developing states more broadly have been quite overlooked. And this is one of the reasons why with this wider project and this report specifically, we wanted to put the focus on small island developing states that find themselves at the forefront of the climate crisis, and yet they have remained underrepresented in this emerging body of evidence.
So my next question to you is, who really was the audience of the report? Who was it for? Who did you interact with? Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, maybe I can start with who the report is aimed towards. Then Marta can talk about who did we interact with in the country. So this report is really aimed at a broad group. It includes government policymakers, climate and disaster response agencies, labor and social protection actors, but it's also meant for civil society organizations that work directly with communities and on policy. It's meant for regional bodies like CARICOM and the 5Cs, and also international partners, because there's a lot of sharing that can happen across borders, particularly with the Pacific, but in other areas as well that are facing climate disasters. Because it's aimed at a broad group of people, because this issue doesn't really fit comfortably in one sector. It cuts across all of them, and that's why in the report we emphasize the need for a coordinated response and instead of siloed approaches.
In terms of the interactions that we had while working on this research over the time span of 3 months, we devoted a lot of time to conducting interviews with people that have a well-documented knowledge and the expertise on the intersection between climate change and human exploitation, who had that kind of lived experience that Cherisse, you were referencing before, in Antigua and Barbuda, but not only, because the socioeconomic conditions of Antigua and Barbuda are not unique. They are quite observed in other Caribbean countries, so we also wanted to bring in our study some of that regional flavor and perspective. So we spoke with the government officials, as I said before, representatives of local NGOs, civil society organizations, academics, and also representatives of regional UN agencies and Caribbean regional organizations.
Thank you. So now that you've given us that baseline of who the audience was, or the intended audience, what do you think would be the key takeaways, or what do you hope would be the key takeaways and outcomes based on this report?
Yeah, that's a great question, Cherisse, and then one that goes to the heart of why we did the report and what we are hoping to change with these kind of findings and this conversation. So I think one of the main outcomes that we are hoping to achieve is to generate more of an understanding about the importance of going beyond the siloed approach that Sneh mentioned at the beginning of our conversation today, whereby you have the conversation on climate crisis, the conversation on human exploitation, and there isn't so much of intercommunication. So we are hoping with this kind of evidence, very context specific, grounded in the lived experience of people in Antigua and Barbuda, to help build a bridge, not only in terms of how we understand and how we looked at those issues with a more intersectional eyes, but also in terms of how does this evidence then translate into responses and programs, and we will have an opportunity to talk about that more in our talk today. But yeah, truly using these findings to inform ways in which things are done, inform responses, and make sure that the way in which we address human exploitation, the way in which we address climate crisis is more interconnected. And again, I think when engaging in Antigua and Barbuda together with Sneh and our partners locally, with the stakeholders in the country, it was great to see the level of interest that there is for this interconnected approach, which I think is something that we are very keen to take forward as we continue to work on these issues.
Thank you. And I have had the pleasure of reading the report cover to cover. I strongly recommend that. But until everyone can get their hands on it and actually read the report online, Give us a little bit of a teaser. What were the key findings that came out of this work?
Yeah, thank you so much, Cherisse, for these questions. There are a number of important and key findings, but I will touch on some of them, and then Sneh will help me to make the picture more complete and comprehensive. But what the report is really telling us, the story that the report brings to surface, is that climate change in Antigua and Barbuda is generating multidimensional and interconnected vulnerabilities. We see specifically that for people working in climate-sensitive sectors like tourism, agriculture, fisheries, the climate crisis is having an impact on their livelihood, on their economic situation, is creating pathways to poverty. And this, in our research, emerged as the main pathway whereby then people that find themselves in economic vulnerability are at greater risk of ending up in situations of exploitation. We found, for instance, that women and girls that are employed in the tourist sector, when the climate crisis affects those economic opportunities, those employment opportunities, and find themselves suddenly unemployed without a stable and reliable source of income, may find themselves more exposed to ending up working in the informal sector, for instance, in a local bar, where the informal environment creates opportunities for exploitation, situations of sexual exploitation to emerge. And while this is the main pathway that we identify in our research, it is worth mentioning that it is not isolated. There are other vulnerabilities that come into play. For instance, displacement, as was observed in Barbuda back when there was Hurricane Irma in 2017, lack of access to reliable healthcare, education, and they all play reinforcing one the other. And besides the vulnerability that women and girls are found to be exposed, we also found, and perhaps this Cherisse connects a bit with the unexpected findings that you were asking us about before. Boys are not unaffected by the climate crisis. We found that men and boys are also finding themselves very much affected. They also are affected through the pathway of loss of income and poverty. They may end up working in informal sectors, very labor intensive, where there isn't protection, where they are not working under regular contracts that give them safety, that give them a standard regular paycheck. So this creates a series of vulnerabilities. And finally, we also identified some instances in which boys may themselves be exposed to the risk of sexual exploitation. And this is very much underreported because of social stigma. This is very unspoken about. And this is something that we found in the report. But again, we couldn't go into the depths of these dynamics because of the social stigma that surrounds this reality.
I think one of the things that we found have documented in this report, that there are strong efforts on climate and on trafficking. There's strong efforts to resolve the issues and to address some of the issues, but they probably need a bit of connection. You know, we need to connect the silos. We need to connect all the moving parts. We think that that the climate policies sometimes need to be more focused on the risks of exploitation to the communities that have been displaced or negatively impacted, for example.
That is it from me. All I left to say is to say thank you to you both for chatting with me. This has been absolutely a pleasure. I love talking about the Caribbean. I will hand back over to my co-host, Adrian, who's been very quiet in the background for this episode. And I'll leave it to you, Adrian.
Please ensure that you access the report. It's on two websites, freetheslaves.net and humanrightsinitiative.org.
Thank you for listening to Freedom Matters. I am Dr. Cherisse Francis from the Caribbean Coalition Against Trafficking in Persons. If you want to learn more about the coalition's work, please visit our website, ccatip.org. With me is
Adrian Alexander from Free the Slaves. And if you want to learn more about Free the Slaves, please visit our website, freetheslaves.net. And join us every fourth Thursday right here on WeFM for Freedom Matters.